engage with the media. You see the far left? I flew all the way to Saudi Arabia and gave a speech, it'll be in Arabic, to Al Jazeera. Who would have thought an American general would have done that? Even my boss, General Petraeus, was a little worried. But we gave it, we engaged, and we discussed the matter with them, and it ended the fundamental issues. But we were not afraid to duck behind all the mistakes we made, and trust me, we made a lot of them. And nor should you. You should be inordinately proud of what it is you've done. It is impossible to run a war and not make mistakes. It is impossible. So you know you're going to make them. What's inappropriate is to not acknowledge them and move on. And then to point to, in front of the media and everybody else, what it is that you've done. The reality is, other countries, in this case Saudi Arabia, will use your information and they will be bettered for it. They will help and move on if it's an international issue. Yours is local, but it has also got a component to it that is international. When we moved into Afghanistan, it was an altogether different audience. When we dealt with them, we had to deal with their prisons, wholly inadequate. And fundamentally, we were doing the same thing, trying to establish alliance with the people in the middle so that if they would come to our side, we could be able to work together to push the extremist elements out of the nation. Because it's the battlefield of the mind that we're working on. Now, in the United Nations, after I got out, the president asked me to go and say, what is it that we can do as a globe? He picked the United Nations. So I led an initiative, or was participating with an initiative, to come up with the best practices. And what I'm going to do is quickly go through these, highlight a couple of them, but you should be inordinately proud that of this list, I think I have seen virtually all of them exhibited in your program. The first one is you have to have some definition of what the program is. You have to know what are the goals and the objectives. You have to be able to establish good standards for where the people are going to be taken care of. And this comes back to something that's very important. Military, in this context, has a lot to do with corrections, because you're holding people, and they have to manage them appropriately. And if you mismanage them and mismanage the people who are managing them, you have created a bigger part of the problem. And this is also true in most of all nations, my own included. As I pointed out in my chart, understanding who you have, assessing them, and classifying them correctly. You will be amazed at how many pictures of the people you say we're holding guns and now we're not. They don't want to hold the guns in the first place. Some of them really wanted to hold the guns. They don't want to be holding to anything else right now. So you have to know who you're dealing with. My ardent suggestion, and the UN has jumped all over this, is create a separate facility where possible, and I'll show you why in a second. If you don't, those that are radical will take over the prison population. If they take over the prison population, then what you have really created is a bigger problem for your country. So be monumentally careful about this psychological piece of the element. You need to also control the communications. Reach out to a broad spectrum of individuals. What we have been able to do in the United Nations is get a list of a couple hundred people. I'm going to go back starting the day after I return and try to bring in individuals from your nation into this list of experts. Who better than you to help the rest of the globe? We will be reaching out to you via the United Nations for that, because we need cross-disciplinary experts. We need all kinds of help, from psychologists, etc., to integrate into these programs. Because, and coming back to this point, if you don't control what goes on from the communications inside, they actually run the war from inside. And I will tell you, even the couple hundred you have right now, if they're inordinately powerful, are communicating and moving and advancing their ideology even though you may not want it. So it's important to understand and be carefully and be attuned to the rehabilitation process, the people running the detention centers or the prisons or the people responsible for it, on what are we really trying to do. And that means everybody involved with it, including law enforcement, are all a piece of the whole. It's a big military effort that extends into huge parts of the civilian population. Another very important component is the victim themselves. Internationally, we have found that if victims speak out for what happened to them in this effort, that they have a monumental effect on pushing recruiting back. People say, I don't want to do that to my own people. And it works in large part. There's also a role, and I understand how controversial it is, for individuals who were the worst or pretty bad in the effort when they do change their view. And this has to be a very clear, if they really did change their view. They are proponents of a change. And those proponents will stand out and help you in your efforts. And then individuals of your community who can reach out and be charismatic enough to tell the rest of the world what it is that you're doing is vital. It's important, as you pointed out, to have skills training, basic education, and vocational skills, because where are they going to go if they don't go back to their own communities? It's also important to recognize that individuals who break away ought to be recognized for breaking away and for given some recognition for that achievement, and in some way let them set aside so there's viewed to be a reward. And also, as you have done so well, take care of the families where it looks like and feels like it makes sense. Aftercare programs are vital. Even protective measures for the individuals when they get out are oftentimes very important. We saw this in the IRA and a long list of other efforts, the FARC, etc., where if you don't protect them, they can be taken right back in and, in fact, become much more effective as recruiting. And also, a manner in which you monitor them when they're out is much like was considered parole. Bring them back in and talk to them and constantly evaluate what's going on. As has been pointed out in multiple different presentations, and as you have done so effectively, the UN believes that the integration of the family is critical, and that the greater community that they're a part of needs to understand what you're doing. So this is a public relations campaign, not just for inside the military, but it's also with inside your people, and it's with inside via the media and the international non-for-profits and the other nations. It's a campaign outside to tell them what it is that you're doing. And the last thing I will just comment, the last comment made by the UN, is that there are a lot of other fields related to terrorism. If we can reach out and grab a rock on Mars, how many science and technology efforts had to go in to make that one little thing happen? The same thing is true in this business of rehabilitation, and it changes and will change. The last couple comments I want to make are that this is really war fighting. On the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, you'll see the basic ingredients necessary to win. You must have political will, you must have a war strategy that makes sense and fits, and you must be able to isolate the insurgent from the rest of its activity, largely so they can't recruit. And of the major activities that we use outside of kinetics, 3 of them, corrections, rule of law, and police training, are the largest component of that influence. So they are the components, the dials you can turn in this whole process. This is just an example of Iraq. It just happened to be the only slide I have to remind you, when we in the military think about going in and using kinetics and force, which we have to do to establish the conditions where we can establish rehabilitation, it's vital to remember it is always about the battlefield of the mind. Always. We are always dealing with the individuals, how they think and where they go. And the other little interesting aspect is everybody in your community is watching you. Watching you, communicating about you, putting it out on the internet, so that guys like me who want to know what's going on in Sri Lanka can press a button, can do a little YouTube, and find out everything. So it's not like you're doing it without being observed. You're being observed full-time, all the time. I want to congratulate a country who has taken on an objective of 3 decades, and in 3 years, done something that the rest of the globe needs to hear about. In general, I encourage you and hope, sir, that you will take this message to the rest of the globe, joined by experts and by people who will want to raise more questions and will want to check your numbers and will want to do everything about that. And I encourage you to address them anyway, because you have joined a very small league of all the hundreds of nations who have addressed this issue, aggregated a plan, and made a significant effort take place. There are very few, less than a handful of other nations who have done that and done it as well as you have. And then the last comment I want to leave is somewhat of a cautionary one. And that is, don't rest on your laurels. The ideological embers of the fire that you put out are smoldering beneath the surface. They are still there. They have not gone away. Rehabilitation has dampened it. It's given you an opportunity to address the legitimate grievances of the individuals who are involved. But failing to address those, it'll be oxygen like to a small ember, and it will blow up in a different form. Rehabilitation is a gift, but it mandates continuing effort. Thank you very much.